That is Mahogany! And welcome to What the Hype, where this week we are talking about the hype around the Hunger Games and previewing what we can expect from the second spin-off novel when it is released in less than a week. Eric and Pam are joining me for this week's discussion. Hey, you two dystopian lovers?
That works.
Okay, sure. Cool. Before we get started, make sure you follow us on social media and your favorite podcast app. Just search for What the Hype Podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. And don't forget, you can see full video episodes over on YouTube. So let's start with Hunger Games: A History, if you will. The first book was initially published in 2008 by Suzanne Collins, and her book is credited with popularizing the young adult dystopian genre. Other popular dystopian series that followed soon after included Divergent and The Maze Runner. I read Divergent. Pam, I think you read Divergent. Eric,
I read Divergent, and I read The Maze Runner. I can't remember if I ever finished it, but I definitely read the first two.
Okay. How about you, Eric?
Didn't get into the others, but was aware of them as I was coming out. There was this huge surge, as you say. Takes a lot for me to fall for something. But I fell hard for Hunger Games, so.
And dystopians, I'm already crapping on dystopians a lot within the first few minutes, but dystopian novels, I think, can be hard to love just because it's such dark material typically. But we can get into that in a little later. So getting back to the Hunger Games, Catching Fire and Mockingjay, the sequel and threequel, were released in 2009 and 2010, respectively, which in hindsight, I had forgotten the release dates. That quick release schedule probably helped create hype around this franchise because we didn't have to wait long.
I think that's right. I think that it burned very hot, very brightly, very hotly, quickly. And not having to wait too long meant that nothing else had been able to scoop up like the conversation or steer the conversation away from what was happening with Suzanne Collins' work.
Yeah. She just hit it at the right time too, because, this is coming off of Harry Potter and the Twilight craze. People are looking for a new series to sink their teeth into, to be a big fan of, and to like follow on the journey from page to screen. But I will say too that like the young adult genre overall was really experiencing a huge boom during this time as well. You have authors like John Green, for example, that are starting to get really popular. And so I think that like, it's not just that the dystopian craze took off with this. It's just that young adult fiction was having a huge moment and people were looking for books of substance to sink their teeth into, coming off of other successful franchises and book series. So there's a lot going on around this time.
Yeah, that's a good point. So the first movie adaptation premiered in 2012, starring Jennifer Lawrence. And then Catching Fire was turned into a movie, of course. And then the third book was turned into a movie. That was Mockingjay. One note I wanted to make about that, Mockingjay was actually split into two movies, which followed the recent trend set by Harry Potter and Twilight to split the final book of each of these series into two parts. This was the last movie to do it successfully in terms of book to film adaptations, in my opinion. Because and I say successfully, and I'm being very generous when I say that, because a lot of people did not like that it was split, but it did still do pretty well at the box office. Mockingjay did.
I think that it's perfect that this franchise split its finale between this and the Deathly Hallows 2-part films. It just works.
It works, but it was slower. It was a slower movie. Part one was, I guess, or part two was.
I think the reason it works is because it didn't lose momentum. With Twilight, they had to fabricate momentum because there was no big battle. With Harry Potter and also with the Hunger Games, you're leading up to something huge, and small things are happening along the way that are also big. So you kind of have this. You have two crescendos to kind of work with, which is why I will forgive it. But I think what Andrew was really teeing up here was that Divergent famously tried to do the same thing, and it was so catastrophic that they never released the final part.
or
was
filmed
it that the adaptation was failed, or nobody liked the last book, right? That
It
the
was
series.
both.
Oh,
It was that
okay.
the box office was going down and nobody liked the last book.
And people were getting burned out on dystopian novels and movies at that point. But back to the Hunger Games again. Hunger Games is still holding on strong in terms of the franchise continuing on. Suzanne Collins has published one spinoff called The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, and it's set 64 years before the Hunger Games and focused on a young Coriolanus Snow, who was also pretty attractive in the movie, I might add, before he became the tyrannical ruler of Panem. And now, like I said, another spinoff is coming very soon, March 18th. It's called Sunrise on the Reaping, and it's going to follow Haymitch as he competes in the 50th annual Hunger Games, also known as the Second Quarter Quell. And I will note this book is already set to be adapted into a movie, just like Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes was when that book was announced. Suzanne Collins and Lionsgate seem to have a cozy relationship right now when it comes to adapting her work. So here on What the Hype, we like to do this segment where maybe you're a newbie to a fandom. Let's say you want to get a jump start on acting like you're a pro when it comes to a fandom. You've been in it for a long time. Here are 2 things to know to make you a real fan, even if you're not. First of all, a book-related thing. The name Katniss is derived from the plant Sagittaria, commonly known as arrowhead, which symbolizes survival, which is fitting for a skilled archer like Katniss, who must fight to live. And in mythology, the plant is also linked to Diana, the Roman goddess of the hunt, reinforcing Katniss's role as a hunter and warrior.
If you tell this to anyone who is like vetting you for your credential, they'll be very impressed. I'm impressed that you told me this, Andrew.
Exactly. And then here's a fandom-related thing to know to make you a real fan. Fans during the peak hype around the Hunger Games were feral to get their hands on some of Peeta's bread. In the books and movies, he and his family ran a bread bakery, and there are a lot of jokes about Peeta's bread.
Is this a euphemism?
Yes and no. I think we're all down for a good sourdough from time to time. And then,
oh, wow.
And then people are down for Peeta's
Pita
bread. I
Yeah.
don't know. But, okay, I've been a little critical already about dystopian novels in general, but whether or not we have mixed feelings about dystopian books today, what did the 3 of us really like about the Hunger Games series when we were reading it?
Yeah, this series for some reason just captured my imagination, and it's a very fine line. I do not find dark books to be a pleasing, like, it's not my escapism. They're not my cup of tea. I can't sort of relax if I'm reading about horrible, situations happening to people I love. Every once in a while, something comes along and completely undoes that, or stands as a completely untrue statement, and it's the Hunger Games. I think because the dystopia that they're in, the oppressive nation state of Panem, and the horrors of what's being done to them are the point of the book that sparks the resistance, and it tracks, a sort of resistance through to some level of conclusion throughout the trilogy. So there's that element that makes you root for the characters while digesting, I think, in small portions, some truly shocking things, but which ultimately don't turn you off because the story is told in such a way that it somehow manages to, I think, inspire you against the capital instead of just what my normal reaction would be to dystopian novels, which is just to shut down and be like, oh, that sucks. That's really hard. Like, there is still to this day some series where I just don't think I could get into them because it would take a lot of emotion for me to particularly read about these things. Hunger Games somehow manages to skirt right by that.
Do you think that it's because, not to get too ahead, but do you think it's just because there's so much bad in the world right now that you would prefer not to expel energy? And if you think about when the Hunger Games was coming out, this is also like peak Obama era optimism. And so even though you're reading about something that is like so close to the truth that it could potentially happen, it's still a cautionary tale. And we're running high on the possibility of a better future for this country specifically in 2008. So I'm wondering if that maybe has a little bit to do with it as well.
Possibly for others. I think I was always this way where I was like, oh, I want something light and fluffy. Like I didn't like even the darker elements of Harry Potter because I wanted something lighter and fluffier. But the world building, which shouldn't be discredited, is my number one thing that I love about the Hunger Games, is not that it's just some dystopia story that is completely reliant on other histories and other forms of media. The specific world that's built and the characters that live in it, I think, are really awesome. I really like seeing the characters interact with each other. And, I think that you really do, as unlikely as a hero as Katniss is, there are still some problematic elements to Katniss, I think, that haven't been fully digested. But like at the same time, you do feel what she's going through and you do go through it, and it's not off-putting who you're stuck with as the protagonist. And I think she's a really good sign of someone to take you through the story of the books.
Well, like you, Eric, reading novels like this, I feel, can be difficult because of the material. It's dark. It has these worrying messages potentially about the future. But I think what really worked about the Hunger Games is the books were pretty quick reads, and also the plot moved pretty darn fast. I think that helped me. And what I also loved about the Hunger Games, Eric, you mentioned character development, character arcs. It's a colorful cast of characters, particularly in the actual capital. And yes, these people are messed up and many of them are evil, but they're fascinating to follow. I have Effie Trinket just burned in my brain, the movie adaptation in particular, played by
Elizabeth Banks.
Thank you. I was typing it, but couldn't type fast enough. It was just like, I think it was the juxtaposition between this colorful capital, colorful, rich capital versus the districts that are dark, gloomy. These people are working for the capital and then being pushed into the annual Hunger Games for sport. It was a very interesting dichotomy there to follow. And then, of course, the rebellion was very compelling as well. How about you, Pam? What stands out for you?
When I was first reading them, I think, like you, it was just really easy it was such an easy read. It was so easy to get sucked in right away. I remember being captivated. This was like one of those books that I picked up and I read in like a day when, I first picked it up. And I think, in part, it had to do with just the compelling cast of characters and also with just wanting to find out, like, if your favorite person was going to survive because the stakes were so high. Yeah. And it was just, the world was really fleshed out. It was really easy to visualize. And then with the movies, like when they came along, it was just really cool to see how the people behind the scenes envisioned those. And in some ways it was like more than you could have ever hoped for. And in other ways it was like, beyond imagination, but still fits so well. And so, I just think that there was so much to love here, despite any mixed feelings or criticisms we might have looking back on it now, 10 years later, or however long it's been. It's probably been a little bit longer than that now.
All right. Well, we'll dive deeper into dystopian novels in general and look ahead to Sunrise on the Reaping. But first, we're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back. So I wanted to explore dystopian novels in general and why we think YA dystopian novels became popular when they did. And we have been discussing this a little bit so far today. So just for anybody who doesn't know, dystopian novels, they're fictional stories that take place in a society that is corrupted and beyond repair. And at least with a lot of the dystopian novels I have read over the last 10, 15 years, the visual aesthetics, the descriptions are often one of shambles. And there's class warfare going on. And then, of course, there's government overreach. And like I said before, the thing that did strike me about this series was that juxtaposition between the bright and cheery and the happy within the capital, and then the bad, or the sad and the darkness happening across Panem. it was fascinating to follow, and it was also just so new to me. I hadn't read a book like this before, and I think this idea where residents of Panem were being killed for entertainment, fighting to the death, it was just such a shocking premise at the time. Again, at least for me, that I was compelled to read it.
Yeah, I don't think I'd ever read anything like this before. I'd always been a fan of science fiction, and science fiction often does, kind of deal with the what if, but I don't know if like in your research you discovered when the term dystopian novel was coined or not. I would be curious to know about that, if like that was coined as a result of this or if it existed before that. But like looking at stories like 1984, I would say even like Ender's Game is almost dystopian-esque as well. Anything that is like looking to the future, because the future makes you curious, and having any sort of dynamic that is a touchstone to like the reality, I think that automatically has always been compelling to me. I've always been curious about stories like that. So I think the Hunger Games kind of took it to a new level for me.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, like I think that I think people that were kind of science fiction fans probably might have gravitated towards this. And I think that kind of makes sense because science fiction fantasy kind of go hand in hand. And we were kind of brushing up against like the rise of that and the mainstream with stuff like Twilight and Harry Potter. And so, yeah, I think that like when I think about it that way, it kind of works.
Yeah. I also remember when the books were coming out that Collins was receiving a lot of, I would dare say, criticism for this idea for the Hunger Games because her premise felt a little too close to another book that had been out for a while called Battle Royale. Basically, the same premise, young people are being forced to fight each other to the death on TV. I never read this book. I was tempted to just to see what everybody was talking about in terms of comparisons, but the Hunger Games was a sort of modern retelling of it, I think some people would argue.
Yeah, looking into, that novel just briefly too, it does feature specifically junior high school students too, which is the same age range as the people who are in The Reaping. So I definitely get it. I think with the market of being in like strictly American audiences, I don't think Battle Royale made it over here as largely. I could be stoned for being wrong, but at the same time,
it was published in Japan, so yeah, it didn't at least make it big over here in America.
It's a manga series and things. So like, I think that while the ideas are similar, there is an approach, or there is an advantage to telling the same-ish story in a very specifically different either way or to a different audience. I don't know.
Yeah. No, I think that's fair. And we often hear there are no original ideas anymore. Like everybody's inspired by somebody else.
If there was willful plagiarism, then, Suzanne Collins is as guilty as charged. But
right.
I also think that the long history of dystopian novels, going back to like 1984, Fahrenheit 451, they all have numbers in them for some reason in the titles. But A Brave New World we read in school, really just looking into the future, but not in a hopeful way, in a something is off way. Like, what if we continue to improve in some things, but what if it's not all sunshine and roses? What if in fact we did fall into fascism, or disease is cured but only for some? It's very interesting kind of to look at what a non-rosy view of the future that is not yet also an apocalypse, just like people are living and breathing and going on.
Yeah.
So what does that look like? And it's just always very interesting to look into, as with science fiction and speculative fiction, you're looking in a mirror, kind of, but you're not. It's like the mirror is kind of crooked. You're not looking straight back at yourself. Mm-hmm. So it's fascinating to imagine the possibilities of another universe. But then, of course, the whole story is about what we connect to. the ways in which they're similar.
On a related note, I'm wondering if reading these novels when they did come out, and maybe other dystopian novels, did reading them when we did help inform our current thinking on government, on media, on overreach. I think something we've criticized on Millennial is that we never got good media literacy classes. I did in college because I took a radio TV film. I was going for a radio TV film degree. So I had reason to take a media literacy class. But that's not something that everybody takes. And yet it's so important. And the reason I bring it up here is because we see media coverage in the Hunger Games. And with the upcoming spinoff, it looks like we might be getting a little bit of that too, and a little bit of media manipulation. I hope that books like The Hunger Games and even Harry Potter, with what we see in Order of the Phoenix, for example, helped give people an idea of how the government can overreach. And if you're reading a book like The Hunger Games today, and then you put the book down and you open up the New York Times, I say that like any of our listeners are actually opening a newspaper.
Print subscribers of the New York Times. This
Loading
doesn't
up,
work at all, Andrew.
Getting the New York Times delivered to my driveway. I hope when they read what's happening in the news, they're connecting the pieces.
It's the Leo DiCaprio meme gif. Where he's on from Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. It is that, though. You see it happen in a book. It's a fantasy book, or it's reasonably a few steps removed, and you see it in real life, and you're like, wait a minute, that's the same. We're supposed to be making those connections. And, maybe there is a recipe in those same books for resistance as well. That's what I'm finding with Order of the Phoenix, reading that recently as well. They're still, just as there are relevant and eerily similar machinations of a government that is overreaching and creating an oppressive state, there is also some messages of solidarity, where people find hope, where people find togetherness, what people's values are amid all of that crap. So there is actually comfort to be found in these dystopian novels. It's just so wild, and it may take some time to find that, I think. Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts here, Pam?
Well, like you, I went to school for media, basically. I studied journalism, and I started off my journalism career, if you will, even before that. In high school, we were already taking classes or already getting taught lessons on media literacy to a degree. But I think a lot of it too is just having the foundations of history, seeing where you can point to moments in time where propaganda was being used to spread an agenda, which is why a good education is so important. In addition to having good media literacy, which I agree with Andrew, that's something that is sorely lacking across the board overall for not only people in this country probably, but across the world. And it makes sense because, it's easier for the government if we don't have media literacy, which is why we talk about that a lot on our other show, Millennial, and why it's important. So yeah, I think that it just depends on what your foundation was going into reading these books, because if you don't have that foundation, then you could just read this and think, oh, that's crazy, but I can't ever imagine that happening here. At one point, even I think Eric brought up 1984. At one point, even 1984 was unfathomable. But then, 9/11 happened. And here comes the Patriot Act, and they're surveilling everyone.
The surveillance state. Because, these were cautionary tales.
To do that. How many
these were cautionary tales, not guidebooks.
Yeah, yeah, but that's the whole thing. It's sometimes cautionary tales become real because of new technology or what have you. And but yeah, I don't know. I just it's hard to kind of tell, because it would be so easy for somebody that wants to be blissfully ignorant to just read or watch these movies and think, well, that was fun, that was entertaining,
and then call it nothing home.
Right,
Effie
exactly.
Trinket was a character, wasn't she?
Well, she was certainly a character.
Caesar Flickerman loved him. Yeah.
Imagine if your favorite character is Caesar Flickerman.
I mean, he was kind of.
Wait a minute.
It was fun.
That's why I'm concerned about some of these kids that are like watching and reading the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, and they're like so obsessed with young hot President Snow and
I
shipping
know.
Snow and Lucy. And I'm like, did you not get that this was like an abusive relationship and he was trying to control her?
Yeah.
And they're just like, but I could fix him. And it's like, no, you can't.
Are either of you reading any dystopians today or in recent years?
Just the news.
Well, that's fair. I'm looking at my bookshelf right now. I'm trying to, I think like the closest is like Fourth Wing, but that's like super fantasy, you know?
Yeah, I would say the most recent one I've read that would fall under dystopian is Ready Player One, but that's been out for a while.
Oh, that's a good
now.
example. Yeah, you're right. That is dystopian.
Yeah, and then the movie came out maybe about 10 years ago at this point. And there was a sequel that I started, but it wasn't, I didn't finish it.
I amended then. Same for me. That would be the most recent one.
Okay.
But I did read the Uglies, that was another bigger dystopian book. Scott Westerfield, pretty popular back around this time as well. Netflix, I think, did an adaptation of the first book last year, and I did watch that. So
okay.
I'm wondering if maybe the dystopian craze is slowly coming back as a result of the Hunger Games renaissance.
Oh, man. The books that I've read and loved most recently, I would describe as utopian science fiction. It's ones like The Martian, where everyone rallies to get an astronaut home, and it not to spoil the end of The Martian, but like you see people overcoming great scientific odds to achieve a goal in a hopeful thing. Entire countries that are not predisposed to working together. That's like crack to me. You know, and so utopian science fiction. And Andy Ware's latest Project Hail Mary, the audiobook I went through,
I've heard
was just
great things
absolutely
about that.
blown away. Nobody writes it like him. And so really getting my rocks off there. But I think it's because a lot of the messages that I've read in the Hunger Games still stick with me, though. They haven't faded much as, one would expect.
We're going to take one more break today, and then we're going to talk about Sunrise on the Reaping, the new Hunger Games spinoff. So we'll be right back. So this new book, Sunrise on the Reaping, arrives March 18th. I'm pretty excited about it. I didn't love the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes while reading it. I was listening to the audiobook. It wasn't keeping me. But then I saw the movie and I really enjoyed it. So I'm excited for Sunrise on the Reaping because of that. And also because this one follows Haymitch during the second quarter quell. And I thought to get everybody on the same page, we should read the official synopsis. It says, when you've been set up to lose everything you love, what is there left to fight for? As the day dawns on the 50th annual Hunger Games, fear grips the districts of Panem. This year, in honor of the quarter quell, twice as many tributes will be taken from their homes. Back in District 12, Haymitch Abernathy is trying not to think too hard about his chances. All he cares about is making it through the day and being with the girl he loves. When Haymitch's name is called, he can feel all his dreams break. He's torn from his family and his love, shuttled to the capital with the 3 other District 12 tributes, a young friend who's nearly a sister to him, a compulsive oddsmaker, and the most stuck-up girl in town. As the games begin, Haymitch understands that he's been set up to fail, but there's something in him that wants to fight and have that fight reverberate far beyond the deadly arena.
Careful what you wish for, right?
And quickly, I'll just add, Suzanne Collins has said when promoting the book that the story lent itself to a deeper dive into the use of propaganda and the power of those who control the narrative, which, again, feels reflective of reality.
I'm obsessed.
I feel like she, nowadays, when she does return to this world, she does so when she has some commentary to make about the current state of 100%. The world. And I kind of love that because you can really tell that she's not just like doing it for any other reason, that she's been inspired by real world events.
Yes, she's not, and you never see her on social media. She's one of these celebrities who is just totally off social media, which is great.
How refreshing.
Shout out to you and Stephanie Meyer,
right?
Miss Collins. And then, to your point, Pam, when she does have something to say, she comes out with a new book that, frankly, all of us are asking for. We want more of these backstories for characters that we love. Haymitch has always been a fan favorite.
The world is so big, and
even though the next one isn't Phoenix Games, I don't know. People might start rioting because they've been asking for that one for forever.
Yeah.
So
Oh, I'll take that any day. I love Finnick. He's probably my favorite character. But the ending of this Hunger Games, the 50th with Haymitch, we know how it happens. It's a big deal in Catching Fire. And yet, both on Suzanne Collins' skills as a writer and in general, the layers that this world operates in, I feel like I don't know the whole story. I feel like I don't know how it ends. There's a very significant falling action as a result of this book, or the story being told in this book, that leads to who Haymitch is when we first meet him and who he becomes throughout Katniss's rebellion. But this is an interesting time because this book straddles the timeline between the last one, Songbirds and Snakes, and this one. So I'm actually you have no idea what's going to come into these games that's still a staple or remnant from the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, the 10th games. Yeah,
and I wonder, because to your point, this will be our first book since that Snow prequel. I wonder if we will see Snow in such a way that feels tied to what we learn about him in Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes.
Right, he's kind of closer in age to the Katniss, and by then he's Supreme President Snow and all this thing. So I'd like to believe his character's a lot more closely related to, but you'd still almost want to see remnants of maybe he's still searching for Lucy Greybeard or something. Would be wild.
Something that I really like about this synopsis is, especially towards the end, you kind of start to see how there are already some parallels that you could make between a young Haymitch and Katniss when we meet her, specifically his understanding of being set up to fail. That's part of why Katniss is enraged so much from the beginning, because she feels that way since he's all been given up by the time that we meet adult Haymitch in the books.
Oh, it's his fault.
Right. But she wants to fight, and so does he, despite the odds being against him. And that's ultimately what ends up lighting a spark for Haymitch in the original trilogy. So it'll be interesting for sure.
Yeah, and I'm just also thinking about this one tribute from District 12 who will be going with him described as a young friend who's nearly a sister to him. That potentially reminds me of the Katniss-Primrose relationship.
Ooh, yeah.
Something that I'm really looking forward to seeing is just more backstories for some of the characters we already know and love. I'm thinking about Caesar Flickerman again. He could be the host. Mags could possibly be a mentor during the 50th.
Yeah.
Tiger Snow could be one of the stylists. President Snow, of course, could be there. Plutarch Heavensby is also on the table as well.
Yeah, there's some interesting characters who it would be interesting to see, in addition to the fact that we have to somehow accommodate, or Suzanne has to do in the writing, twice as many contestants as possible. How did she keep them all separate? How many are going to die in the first 5 minutes of the games, just so you don't have to keep track of as many kids from...
And to that point, I'm still reeling from all the characters you meet in the Fourth Wing series, and with the latest book, it's just who's this character? Who's that character? Wait, what? Too many in Onyx Storm. So it is a delicate balance, but I will also add Katniss's mom is potentially a character who could show up because she's around the same age as Haymitch and could also be in the Reaping for the 50th. And we don't really know anything about Katniss's parents, so that would be very interesting.
Yeah, especially her dad.
Yeah, we just know he was a minor, right? And he got killed in the blast.
Mm-hmm. I mean, he came of age eventually, but yeah.
Yeah. And she was supposedly well-to-do, so maybe she could be friends with
well-to-do,
this stuck-up girl or something like that. It seems like maybe she's being characterized that way because she is on the higher society side of District 12.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Eric, what would you like to see in this book?
I definitely want to see just another unexpected turn into the world, and another, like, specifically the arena. I want to see another really cool arena. I have not yet recovered from the third quarter quell arena from Catching Fire,
That was
where
really cool.
you quickly learn that it's designed with a very specific motif in mind, and that is like, every time I think about it I get chills. So I fully expect that this arena, which has to be big on the spectacle for such an important games, will be no less impressive. So I want something that I like even better.
Yeah. Catching Fire was such a good movie, too. I think that's my favorite Hunger Games movie. The way it raised the stakes. And I still remember when we saw the start of that game, Eric, and how tense and fast paced it was. Like, wow, that was exciting.
Yeah. It's just everything about it. There's a lot happening.
And how you want to bring up Lucy Gray here?
Yeah. And I mentioned earlier, but Lucy Gray Baird, the way in which the book ends, the book and movie of Songbirds and Snake ends, is, I think, very like open-ended and uncertain, and she is not blamed for the way that Snow is the way that he is, but at the same time there's some unresolved emotion there. I think that 40 years may seem a bit late to be exploring with Snow, but I am hoping that there is some remnant or some explanation or some plot threads that are resolved, or some conclusions essentially from the way in which that earlier book or most recent entry ended.
yeah, it seems like her, like the prequel makes it clear that her songs survive. And obviously we know that like Katniss even knows some of them later on. And so I think that like an easy way to weave that thread into this next one is to make it clear that like her songs are still around. I think that would be pretty haunting too, if they, because they could so easily just use that motif and fold it into the fabric of the story.
And viewers would be like, oh, there it is. And
Right,
when the movie is released. Yeah. Yeah, I'm very pleased that Suzanne Collins continues to release new novels. I don't think anybody expected her to release books post core trilogy. And she did take many years to release The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. And then this next one, Sunrise on the Reaping, is only coming, I don't know, 3-4 years after Ballad. So maybe she has a long-term plan to release more of these books. They seem to be doing well, these spinoffs. And even though The Hunger Games as a fandom, I feel burned out, pun not intended, pretty quickly, there's clearly still an appetite for these characters in this world. And getting back to something we said earlier, it's also interesting just to kind of check in with Suzanne and see what's on her mind. Because we can't find her on Twitter.
I just think it's nice that this franchise took a break and is coming back now, because I'm sure, Andrew, you'll remember that there was a long stretch of time where Lionsgate was greenlighting and then tabling other kind of spinoffs for the Hunger Games, and it was all coming on the heels of Mockingjay, the final part of Mockingjay, being out in theaters. And so it did kind of feel like more of a cash grab. We heard about I think they were going to do like a spin-off TV show that was at one point that was going to cover some of the other characters. And then I think they did end up making like a theme park, or like a land in a theme park somewhere else.
Overseas somewhere. It was a little odd.
It was weird. Because it's like, why would you want to go visit District 12? That sounds depressing.
Yeah, it's in China at Lionsgate Entertainment World. Right. And there's a 3D motion simulator ride. There is themed dining, including Pita's Bakery, and then the Capitol Club. And then there's some themed shopping, the typical theme park attractions. So yeah, I remember the headlines around that when they announced that, like you're saying, Pam, people were like, I don't want to spend time in Pan Am. What are you talking about? In District 12? Woohoo, District 12. Meanwhile, Universal's like, here's Super Mario World, this happy place with Princess Peach and Mario and Bowser. But
y'all want to get coal dust in your lungs and be permanently disfigured?
Right.
I say that, and I know Andrew will back me up on this. The Hunger Games installations at San Diego Comic-Con when the movies were still coming out were like some of the coolest installations that they had.
As was the movie marketing in general when each movie was released. It was really impressive stuff they were putting together, poster-wise in particular. We were running Hypable at the time, and I got a rose from President Snow, sent by Lionsgate. But it was like kind of creepy, but also awesome.
Yeah,
it's surveilling you to this day, right, Andrew? You got to check that. Check it for wires. I also
have a little piece of Snow's crushed granite chair. I might have the rock type wrong, but I have something like that as well. Yeah, they were just doing clever stuff like that with the Hunger Games movies.
That's cool.
Yeah. So to wrap things up, would we recommend people read the Hunger Games in the year 2025 if they haven't already? Like jump in fresh? Or does it hit too close to home?
I think there's still a lot of value to reading it, particularly very specific things that the government do echo what seems to be happening now, because the Capitol is very, as we find out with President Snow, very vengeful in their behavior. And we have the most vengeful U.S. president in history currently sitting in the office. So I would say now's a better time than any. If you don't find yourself having time, they are quick. But also the audiobooks were recently re-released and recorded with Tatiana Maslany reading the first three. And cool. Highly recommended them. I blew through them again recently and really was taken by those audiobooks as well as the film adaptations.
Yeah, I agree. I definitely still think there's a place. There's even a place for these books in the classroom, honestly. And I have seen here and there every once in a while on TikTok, a teacher will talk about incorporating these books into the curriculum. And I think it's a great teaching tool for children, even if you're focusing on one thing, like the media literacy angle, for example, that Andrew brought up at the top of this discussion. There's so much to unpack here.
Yeah, and to build on these points, I would add that, yes, it might be hard to read a piece of dystopian fiction with everything that's going on in the world, but there are also lessons about rebellion and scenes of rebellion in this series, and maybe that can bring you some much-needed hope about what can happen when people are fighting back against tyrannical forces and just evil people. Any other closing thoughts on the world of the Hunger Games or the upcoming book?
I have a lot of love for what Francis Lawrence has done in the adaptation. I just feel like, and that's what got me into Songbirds and Snakes. I was not predisposed to reading about a young, hot President Snow. I thought the story would look on him sympathetically. I was so wrong. It's clear that the author's heart and mind is still in the same place it was when she wrote the original trilogy, that she has a very keen and watchful eye on government overreach and power, and what it means to be the little guy that's being, completely subdued. So Francis Lawrence too, just perfectly, those movies really, really, really capture, I think, the spirit of the books in a way that is rare for adaptations. So again, just a lot of love for this world in particular and the media that we've gotten as a result of it.
Sunrise on the Reaping is actually scheduled to be released as a movie next year. And you mentioned Francis Lawrence, Eric. He is slated to come back to direct once more. I think he directed all movies in the franchise except for the first one, which was directed by a man named Gary Ross.
Yep.
Who did a great job with that movie as well. But
yeah,
Francis, I think, brought the series to another level, and it's nice to see he continues to have a good relationship with Lionsgate and seemingly Suzanne Collins to adapt her books.
Mm-hmm.
All right, well, that is the hype around the Hunger Games. Listeners, don't forget to follow us in your favorite podcast app and leave us a review. We want to know what you think about What the Hype, and also sound off on the Hunger Games and the upcoming spinoff. Let us know how you feel about dystopian novels and the Hunger Games series in 2025. Also, be sure to follow What the Hype on social media. We're What the Hype Podcast on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, and Twitch. Over on X, where you can't find Suzanne Collins. Actually, you can't find her any of these places. Over on X, we're What the Hype Show. And then our website is whatthehypepodcast.com. If you want to email us any of your feedback, you can do that by sending it into whatthehypepodcast@gmail.com. And if you have a friend or family member who needs convincing on why The Hunger Games is worth a read, share this episode with a friend and also let them know that we're walking through all aspects of pop culture every week. We will be back with another episode on Sunrise on the Reaping in a couple of weeks. Like I said, it's out Tuesday, March 18th, and then we're going to take some time to read it, and then we'll record an episode later in March. So stay tuned for that. Are you two buying a physical copy, ebook? What are you doing?
I'm going to buy a physical copy. I'm going to read it the night it comes out.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I plan to get a physical copy. I don't know if I'll start reading it the night I'll start reading it the night it comes out. I won't finish it the night it comes out.
But I've also pre-ordered the audiobook.
Nice.
Not narrated by Tatiana, right?
Sadly not, and also not narrated by anybody who's done, but I'm keeping an open mind.
Okay, cool. All right. Thanks everybody for listening. We'll see you next time. Bye.